I'm Dan Harris. Tonight on World News, the White House throws cold water on Congress's plan to tax those AIG bonuses, calling it a dangerous way to go. Officers down. A routine traffic stop ends in extreme violence. Tonight, an entire city is stunned. Papal visit. Millions come out to see Pope Benedict today in Africa on a trip where he made some unflinching comments about everything from condoms to witchcraft. And family ties. The granddaughter of the founder of Bank of America says the people running the bank today are, quote, idiots.
I wonder if they aren't just a bunch of amoral people.
From ABC News headquarters in New York, this is World News.
Good evening. After a week in which Washington was consumed with rage at those AIG bonuses, today the White House seemed to be trying to stop the stampede. A White House advisor called that bill in Congress to slap huge taxes on AIG executives, quote, dangerous. So what's going on here? Well, the White House is apparently concerned that that tax might complicate an enormous bank rescue plan that the White House plans to roll out tomorrow. So we are going to start tonight with John Hendren, who's at the White House.
Today, the Obama administration gave its strongest indication yet. The president opposes a tax to get those AIG bonuses back.
The president would be concerned that this bill may have some problems in going too far. That may be a dangerous way to go.
Just 3 days ago, the president sounded as mad as the rest of the nation about millions of dollars going to some of the executives blamed for the financial collapse.
We're going to do everything we can to see if we can get these bonuses back.
But the White House must walk a fine line because a plan in Congress to tax 90% of the AIG bonuses could scare off the very investors the government needs to make the next phase of the recovery plan work. Tomorrow, Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner will outline that plan to buy up the toxic assets crippling the nation's banks. The government would partner with private investors to buy up $1 trillion in banks' toxic assets, mostly mortgages gone bad. The government would pay $100 billion itself and use low-interest loans to persuade investors to buy the rest.
The thought that the government might, after the fact, change their compensation is horrifying for them. Clearly, the government will have to persuade these investors that they're not going to have compensation limits.
The administration is already tamping down Wall Street expectations.
I don't think Wall Street's expecting, the silver bullet. This is one more piece.
The White House is clearly worried about another slide in the stock market, like the one that followed Geithner's announcement last month of the administration's bank rescue plan. Geithner's reputation, too, is on the line.
No, I don't approve, but I don't think we have a lot of choices.
I don't see a lot of things positively thus far that Timothy Geithner has been involved in.
Geithner may be embattled on Capitol Hill, Dan, but with his boss, it's another story. President Obama said this weekend he wouldn't accept Geithner's resignation even if he gave it. Dan?
John Hendren reporting from the White House lawn on this Sunday evening. John, thank you. For more on this, let's go to Michael Santoli, senior editor of Barron's. Thanks for coming in.
Sure, happy to.
So after we've had stimulus plans, we've had bank bailouts, we've had interest rate cuts, now there are a lot of people who say with this plan to rescue the banks, to get at these toxic assets, we're getting at the heart of the problem. Can you explain simply why that is?
Well, the origin of this problem was too many bad loans made to too many uncreditworthy borrowers, and the fact that we had these loans remaining on the bank's books. And therefore, we created uncertainty among private investors. They didn't know if we could invest in the banks. The banks themselves didn't know if they were going to survive or die, therefore pulling back their willingness to extend credit. If we can remove these assets from the books in an economic way, if we really can pull private capital in to do that job, then yes, it does get around one of the big impediments to a recovery.
So if we can get these assets off the books, the idea is the banks will start lending again. But let me ask you the question that a lot of people are going to have is, will the plan that the White House rolls out work? Will they be able to get private investors to go and buy things that a lot of people consider to be garbage?
The details are going to be very important, and if the details are structured in such a way that the incentives are great for private capital to come in and see a profit opportunity, and for the banks themselves to be willing sellers at the prices arrived at, this has been the stalemate all along, then yes, it could be effective. They're talking about up to $1 trillion. If we got anywhere near $1 trillion, it's a material amount of money for the financial system. It should do some good, not magic, but some good.
All right, Michael Santoli, thank you. Stakes are high on this one. We're going to move now to California, where 3 police officers have been killed and a 4th has been declared brain dead as a result of one of the worst attacks on law enforcement in the history of that state. Brian Rooney tonight is in Oakland.
It started, as it often does, with a routine traffic stop. The driver came out of his car firing and fatally shot 2 motorcycle officers. Neighbors who heard the gunfire ran to the intersection.
I was devastated. There was 2 cops on the ground, and they looked like they was already gone.
Other officers arrived at what quickly became an emotional scene. After the first shooting, the gunman ran only a few hundred feet to this apartment building, where he holed up in a closet. The SWAT team moved in, and police could be seen entering the building. Moments later, they came out, dragging a wounded officer. And shortly afterwards, they brought out a second.
2 officers sustained fatal gunshot wounds, and a 3rd officer received a minor wound, a graze wound to his head. SWAT officers returned fire, striking and fatally wounding the suspect.
Relations between the Oakland police and parts of the community, always strained, have been tenser since this January 1st shooting of an unarmed man by a transit officer. The gunman in yesterday's incident was a 27-year-old parolee who was wanted on a warrant. One of his sisters was inside the apartment where he died. She was seen being pulled out by the police.
You know, I don't want to go to jail. You don't want to go back. He didn't want to go back. That's the only thing.
But the result was the police department in shock. Brian Rooney, ABC News, Oakland, California.
South of there in San Diego tonight, federal drug officials are demanding that drivers return wads of cash that they scooped up from a local freeway. The money was thrown out of a moving vehicle by suspected drug dealers who were being chased by the police. Drivers were stopping their cars, some in the middle of the road, to scramble for the money. Now, some people have turned over the cash, but investigators are looking at the video now to track down people who haven't. In North Dakota tonight, people who live along the Red River are bracing for potentially record flooding. The river is expected to crest later this week at a level higher than in 1998, when flooding devastated the city of Grand Forks. Tonight, volunteers are rushing to fill more than 2 million sandbags. And there was a funeral today for the actress Natasha Richardson in upstate New York, where she and the actor Liam Neeson got married and had a home. Friends and family, including her mother, Vanessa Redgrave, were at the service today. Richardson, as you may remember, died from a head injury suffered after she fell on a ski slope in Canada. Tonight, Pope Benedict is preparing to return to the Vatican after a historic visit to Africa. The Pope touched millions of people on this trip, but he also angered many people by making controversial remarks about condoms and AIDS. Here's ABC's Hillary Brown.
This was Pope Benedict's first trip to Africa as pontiff, but in less than a week, in just 2 countries, he seems to have achieved rock star status. As many as 1 million Catholics poured into a huge sun-baked plain outside the Angolan capital of Luanda today to celebrate Mass with their Holy Father. 40% of the population here are Catholic. The Pope spoke about the horrors of civil war, and he condemned the practice of witchcraft, still common in many African countries. And he expressed sorrow at the death of 2 girls killed in Angola yesterday in a stampede at a papal youth rally. But earlier, en route to his first stop, Cameroon, the Pope infuriated AIDS activists with his assertion that the distribution of condoms will not help the fight against AIDS and may even make the problem worse. AIDS has killed 25 million people in Africa since 1980.
He spoke theologically and to the social condition to say you have to turn away from risky behavior first and foremost.
There are 140 million Catholics in Africa, making the continent very important to the Vatican. Pope Benedict's first trip there may be remembered for what he said about the disease that's now killing them by the millions. Hillary Brown, ABC News, London.
And we have one more note tonight about the Catholic Church. The retiring Archbishop of New York has opened a new debate over priests and celibacy. Edward Cardinal Egan surprised many people in the church by suggesting in a radio interview that the Vatican may have to reconsider whether priests should be allowed to marry, which is not the position of the Pope. And we do have a developing story out of Montana right now. The Federal Aviation Administration says 17 people have been killed in a plane crash in the city of Butte. The twin-engine plane went down in mid-afternoon, crashing into a cemetery about 500 feet from the airport while attempting to land. And coming up here on World News this Sunday, an exclusive interview with a Taliban leader who says formerly separate groups are now uniting against America and that they have suicide bombers ready to go. The granddaughter of the man who founded Bank of America. Why she calls the people running the bank right now idiots. And Twitter trouble, from jurors to NBA stars to politicians, when sharing goes wrong.
This is World News, brought to you by Progressive.
This week, the Obama administration is expected to release its new plan for dealing with what many people feel is the #1 national security problem facing this country right now: what to do about Afghanistan and Pakistan. And tonight, there is new evidence that once divided Taliban factions are now uniting to fight the U.S. ABC's Nick Schifrin has this report tonight from Pakistan.
Just over the Afghan border in this poor rural district of southern Pakistan, the Taliban are hiding. You can't see their black turbans anymore like you could just a few years ago when they appeared openly. But they're still here, and locals say they're as strong as ever, supported by the Pakistani military, which has received billions of dollars from the U.S. since 9/11.
They want to get dollars in the pretext of running the war against terrorism.
Further north in the Pakistani tribal areas, also along the border, militants continue to train and launch terror attacks into Afghanistan. And once feuding Taliban commanders have pulled together for the common goal of fighting the U.S. Molvi Nazir is one of those commanders. They're attacking our land with drones, painting the people of Afghanistan, martyring the people of Palestine, he says. We've readied suicide bombers for them. They cannot escape us. The two Taliban strongholds of Baluchistan and Waziristan are across from some of the most dangerous parts of Afghanistan, where violence is up this year as much as 90%. But do not expect the Pakistani military to confront these militants. In Waziristan, the local government says there's an unspoken understanding they won't attack each other.
All these foreign extremist groups were able to operate from Pakistani soil.
Here in Islamabad, the federal government denies that claim, but it doesn't deny the fact that what happens here has a direct effect on the security of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan and even on the security of the U.S. itself.
If you want to protect the homeland, you have to invest here, because there is a linkage here to security over there.
And so the U.S. will pour billions into trying to improve Pakistan's military and develop Pakistan's impoverished tribal areas. The fate of the war on terror may depend on it. Nick Schifrin, ABC News, Islamabad.
And for more on all of this, we're very glad to have with us tonight ABC's senior foreign affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz. So, Martha, we've got 17,700 new U.S. troops going into Afghanistan per order of the president. What is their mission?
Their mission will be, and you'll see this rolled out this week by the Obama administration, to go after al-Qaeda, to make sure al-Qaeda does not have a strong hold in Afghanistan. We'll have about 64,000 troops in Afghanistan by the end of August.
So go after al-Qaeda, but what about Taliban?
They don't really talk specifically about Taliban.